Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and plant lover. I enjoy discussing down to earth tips and advice to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. And I also aim to bring you interesting and relevant topics to educate you all about the landscaping and horticultural industry. Welcome to Down the Garden Path podcast. And I'm excited today to talk about October in the garden. Many think it's the end of gardening season, which means there's a ton of work to do. But really, there isn't. The best thing you can do in October is really nothing. You can just enjoy the fall color and the changes in your yard and garden, but really there's not a ton of things to do. There's a few things you can do if you'd like, and I'm going to go over them with you today, and I hope this helps you. First of all, if you've started a vegetable garden or have fruit and vegetables, certainly there is some cleaning up to do and some removing of the old stems and old, like the tomato plant is done, you can pull it out. Pepper plants, same, that idea. And you can throw that in your composter and your brown paper bag to have it taken away. But you still, though, can still sow some less lettuces and some spinach, and I'm trying to think of the other thing, and some spinach and some lettuce that you can still sow, and that you probably will, because the temperatures right now are still very reasonable and very nice. So and those are cool weather plants anyway. They don't particularly do well when it's hot, as anybody who's grown spinach or lettuce knows. They prefer they grow better in the shoulder seasons, I would call it. So the early summer, late spring, and fall. So you can still get out there and buy already plants at a garden center or even start seeds and sow them right into the garden. So that's a good thing to know. But other than that, if you have already, or if you do want to just kind of take everything out and clean it out if it's done, then now is a good time, especially while the weather is good, to top up with some compost, top up with some manure, get ahead of next year. Take a photograph so you know where plants were planted, because next year you need to put things in different places. It's not good to plant the same like tomato plants in the same spot every year, that type of thing. So it's really good to move things around for the nutrition. You could also plant a cover crop if you feel like your soil wasn't great. I know I'm having issues with mine not being very, I guess, quality, even though we've put a lot of soil, a lot of new compost, and a lot of new soil in every year. It still I didn't have a great harvest this year. So that's something you can definitely do for your vegetable garden. And that cuts for containers. I have things in containers as well. I will probably wait until there's a frost and things really, really are done before I start pulling them out. But if you're anxious to get going and want to take advantage of the nicer weather in the beginning of October, then go right ahead. If you want to still, maybe you want to put some fall flowers like mums or chrysanthemums or asters, like we've talked about on the show, in containers for you to enjoy into the fall, and then go right ahead. Sometimes you can take out your tomato plant from a container and pop in an aster, for instance. So you've got a pop of color looking out your kitchen window or your patio doors. So go right ahead and do that. I do want to talk about annuals and perennials also. We're still a long ways before we get a frost. So your annuals are probably still doing okay. They may be a little bit leggy or a little bit looking a little sad. Water, fertilize, you can still do that to kind of extend the life. Also, you can, let's say if you have a mixed container, you can always take out something that looks the worst, and put in fall, like a kale or a chrysanthemum or an aster, as I talked about before on the show, something different, or even a perennial that you can put in. Maybe you've got a perennial in your garden, like a coral bell or something like that, that you want to, or a hosta that you want to pop in the container to fill up that dead spot. But other than that, perennials, there's not really anything you need to do as far as cutting them back. You can still do some deadheading if things are really looking like some of my phlox tends to really start looking brown and not necessarily attractive. So yes, you can cut those ones back. Same with the my coneflower. I it's on the fence whether you can leave them up and leave the seed heads for the birds, because they certainly love them, but knowing that this wind will spread them in your garden. And that's kind of what has happened to me the last few years. I have left the purple coneflower seed heads up, and it's not been good for me, who's someone who doesn't have as much time as I'd like to in the garden. Weeding, there's a ton of my ground. It looks like I have a ground cover, but really it's teeny tiny baby coneflowers. So the wind will spread them for you if you don't deadhead them. So if you do have something that you find could be a little bit on the, I don't want to say invasive, because it self-seeds. So if you do have a plant that self-seeds, then certainly go ahead and remove the heads so that you don't have that issue. So there's some that you can start tidying up. Again, annuals, you can add some new ones, some fall ones to your garden, and enjoy this really nice season. Now is also a good time to take some pictures, because you may wonder, like, where's the gaps, where are things really tired, like for example my phlox, it really went tired quickly this year, and so I'm looking at, okay, what do I take it out, or should I add something else there to kind of compensate, and so it looks better when the phlox is done, and something that could take over. And I'm actually considering an aster for that very reason, because they really don't do much until later in the season. And I think that might be a nice trade-off to be able to, come beginning of September or mid-September, start cutting back the phlox that is looking a little tired, and then giving room for the asters to come up and take its place in the garden. So I think by standing back and taking a few pictures of your garden at this time of year, October is a perfect time to do that. And it'll help you make some decisions and some plans for what to do next. So I am taking all these tips from my book, Down the Garden Path, a step-by-step guide to your Ontario garden, where monthly we've outlined all the steps and all the tips that you can do each month. So I just wanted to use this as a resource, because it's a great book, I think, and it is filled with things to help you timely manage your garden and landscape. I do want to talk a little bit about shrubs as well. Trees and shrubs, deciduous trees and shrubs, again, there's not much you need to do. Deciduous trees, if it has been, this year it has been a bit of a drought situation here in the GTA, depending on where you are. It is important to water some of those deciduous trees, especially young ones, certainly ones that you just planted this year. It is important to water them weekly, but deeply. So not, 10 minutes every day, half an hour, 40 minutes once a week, so they get a really deep watering to help them get through the winter when things are less abundant, especially since we're not getting the snowfall and the precipitation we have had over the last few years. Like the last few years, we haven't had it. So we don't know what this year will bring. I like things like hydrangeas and weigelias. I really don't think there's any need to cut anything back. I love the winter interest of my hydrangeas. And yes, the flower heads may start to go brown, but I still think it's attractive, and I don't want to see emptiness in my garden all winter. Again, because of we lack of snow cover that we get. I think it was different back in the day when we were getting always guaranteed to have snow from November until March. Then it didn't matter what you did with your garden because it was covered up. But now that we've basically looking at ground except for a few weeks in February, March, I think it's okay to leave your plants alone and not have to do anything. If you do have things that are, like I think about peonies. So there are, and phlox can be that way too, where they do end up getting a little bit of mildew. So those, certainly take those out. I think of 9-barks sometimes can get some mildew. So go ahead and cut those branches or cut those plants down and dispose of the foliage in your garbage. So yeah, if you have something that's diseased or that you're really concerned about, certainly, and unsightly, certainly get rid of it. But if everything else is looking fine and looking good in the garden, then you don't need to worry about it. And you can wait for a frost, which we probably won't get until November. And then, so in November in the garden, I'll tell you some tips to do after we get a frost. And I think that's when you can cut back your hostas and things like that. But up until now, the hosta leaves look great and look perfectly fine. But it is October 1st, so we don't know yet what's coming. But so far, it doesn't look like there would be an early frost. I always say it turns really cold right before Halloween, right when the kids have to then wear winter coats underneath their costumes or over top of their costumes. Definitely. So the one thing to consider with water too is the wind. So even if it's cloudy and starts to cool down, has it been very windy? Because that's another way that the plants lose moisture. And nighttime temperatures. So our nighttime temperatures so far have been warm, and so there's not even any dew or nighttime moisture to help them. So that's something to consider for your garden. Yeah, and now especially evergreens, that was deciduous shrubs and deciduous trees. Mulching your leaves for your deciduous trees, that's something you can do now too, is start to mulch it by not raking them, but if they're starting to fall, my London plane trees are actually starting to lose leaves. I think because of the drought, and even though I have watered, they are still dropping leaves. And so we're just mowing over them right now and kind of composting them right into the lawn. So that's something you can do. You certainly should need to early October anyway, do a lot of bagging of leaves. I think you can still, because the lawn is still, because the temps are warm, the lawn is still growing, albeit slower. And you can go ahead and just mow over the leaves and shred them up for the lawn and add some extra organic material to your lawn. Evergreen shrubs is, especially if you've planted something new, then definitely if you've planted something in the last month or so, or even the last 2 months, August and September, you definitely need to keep it well watered. They really need some extra time to get established, and being in a drought situation as they go into dormancy in winter is never a good thing. So it's very important that you follow a pretty good timing as far as water, like a watering schedule for doing that. So so that's definitely it for small evergreens. Now certainly cedars, certainly smaller junipers, larger evergreens do need water. They may not look like they do, but they do. But they are more established and their roots are deeper, so they're able to draw up water when they need it. But that's something to just consider, especially if you've done maybe a garden around the perimeter of a tree, that type of thing in evergreen. They may need some water there just to kind of help repair the feeder roots that you may have damaged. Yeah, so that is really important from that point of view. And I also wanted to talk about seeds and bulbs. So October is a great time for you to start thinking about bulbs. So one, it's a really good time to buy and plant your garlic. If you are interested in trying to plant or garlic or harvest garlic, your own garlic for next year, now, did you know it's really cool that you plant it in October and then you harvest it in July? So it's kind of an interesting crop. but it's doable. So if you have a shady spot, or sorry, sunny spot, not shady spot, sunny spot, without any competition. I learned this the hard way. I did put some garlic in a perennial and shrub bed, and they just never really developed. And in my research, I learned that they really don't like competition from other plants. So maybe this is, and you can do it in containers too. They would need to be deeper containers, but it's something to consider if you want to grow your own garlic. And October is the time to buy the bulbs and to do the planting, and to cover with, after they've been planted, then cover it with a good layer of mulch, and water it weekly, and unless it rains. And then in the spring, again, paying a bit more attention to it until you harvest in July. So stay tuned here for more on that. The other thing is, of course, our spring bulbs. So many people, and you'll see this in stores, along with the pumpkins, they are certainly putting out all the varieties of spring bulbs: tulips, daffodils, crocus, and my favorite, alliums. So and stock will go. So I think it is a really good time to find the kind of bulbs you want, the varieties and the quantities that you need, but then buy them, but don't start planting them yet. As you notice, if you look around your yard, the chipmunks and the squirrels, they're still feasting and storing for winter, and they're going to dig up anything that they want. So I think it is best for you to not plant them in October. I'm a firm believer of waiting until maybe the end of October, the beginning of November. Certainly the ground doesn't freeze in November. So you might be a little colder. You might have to have a jacket, a warm sweater on, or light jacket on when you're planting in November. But I think it will save you a lot of frustration in not having to fight the squirrels. I literally can remember a few years ago, crocus, I don't think I realized, I know how much they love tulips, but I didn't think they cared about crocus. And I literally was planting them and kind of moving from like left to right in my property. And I stood up, like I was halfway done. And I stood up and looked to my left, and everything I had planted, literally the squirrel just dug it up and ran away with it. So I have learned the hard way. So I'm just definitely advising you. And yes, there's lots of things that people try: the blood meal, the human hair, the dog fur, putting down wire, all of those things. I don't know. I'm down to earth about it all, and I want to keep everything as low maintenance as possible. So I think you'll have much better success if you wait a little bit longer till there is more moisture, because if the soil's muddy, they don't dig in it. If it's quite cold and they've started to kind of stop searching for bulbs, then you have a better chance of success. The other thing that I also recommend, if you listen to any podcasts or anything I've written or newsletters, is I really do recommend planting tulips, not planting tulips. Sorry, I recommend not planting tulips and looking for really interesting daffodils. They do make them very interesting. They make them double, they make them white, they make them short, they make them tall. So, and alliums, same thing: light purple, dark purple, white, small ones, really tall ones, medium-sized ones. They really are an interesting plant. And the thing about daffodils and alliums is they are poisonous to squirrels and other rodents. So they are going to leave them alone. The benefit I find, especially with alliums, is they bloom longer and they stay looking interesting in the garden, and their foliage isn't so in your face. That's another thing that I feel is a bit of strike against tulips for me, is that waiting time in the spring, that you have to wait for the foliage to die back because you can't cut the foliage off. And even if your bunny or your squirrel eats the head off of the top of the tulip, you still have to leave it there looking like that until the foliage dies naturally on its own. And I just don't have the patience for that. So I definitely really recommend looking and considering doing daffodils. As you know, I'm not a huge yellow fan, but I found some light yellows. And spring, that's where I do make an exception. Yellow foliage on my evergreens, as well as daffodils in the spring. So I am planning to plant more in my garden. I realized that I really didn't plant enough, and so they looked kind of wimpy this spring. So I'm hoping to to plant more, and I've got to go. I know I took pictures so I could remind myself of how wimpy and anemic my gardens looked for bulbs. So I definitely will plant those. Hellebores are something that you may not consider, but you can plant them now. The cool thing about them is the leaves are evergreen, but they bloom early spring, even before the tulips and the daffodils. April, some will bloom in February, March, and some will bloom in April, that type of thing. So if you want to put something interesting, I always recommend beside the front door, or where you really are going to see it, enjoy it. And it's really cool to see flowers, and they are really beautiful flowers. If you're not familiar with them, you should definitely Google them. They're beautiful flowers, and it's really kind of cool to see flowers in your garden in February and March. Even if there's snow on the ground, they will bloom. So, and not technically a bulb, but a perennial. And even when they're done blooming, because of how nice and leathery and evergreen their foliage are, they're just a nice ground cover in your garden. And you can certainly plant other perennials around it and have that foliage be a background. So yeah, so let me know what you think, if you are a tulip lover through and through, or if you are willing to give alliums a shot. Another thing that you could try to prevent the squirrels is actually one of the things that many people recommend is actually planting them deeper. And so I purchased an auger attachment for my drill, and I started using that, and I ended up getting a really big size of one. I should have gotten size down, but it did make a really big hole, and a deep hole, much deeper than I ever bothered digging with my shovel. So that's something to consider if you really are really wanting to do tulips. Then consider maybe that adapter to a cordless drill, and try planting them even deeper. But again, sometimes there's no stopping those darn squirrels. Now, you can't talk about October and fall without talking about lawn care. So the temperatures are still fairly mild, especially the nighttime temperatures, like I mentioned. So if you do want to reseed your lawn, now is a good time to do that. Again, I think it's important to leave your grass a little taller, and so they shade themselves and it helps conserve moisture. But I also do know that if you are mowing, like I spoke about earlier, then you can mow those leaves and mow and add that organic material into your lawn. By the end of October, beginning of November, that's when you can apply a winter fertilizer or a second dose of your fall fertilizer. So at the beginning of October, you can do a fall fertilizer if you'd like. I guess I should have started there, is to look at for a fall fertilizer. I do recommend an organic one where it will grow, the slow release. So when you do organic, it is much more of a slow release. You're not going to get an instant green up like you will with the synthetic products, but you will get a longer ability to feed the roots, which is really what you want in order to improve your lawn. So, October, the beginning of October is a perfect time to do that. You do also want to pay attention to, in your lawn, the weeds. So especially crabgrass, which is kind of prolific this time of year. And if it's already gone to seed, then you know you're going to have more crabgrass next year. If you can get any baby plants out before they've gone to seed, then I do recommend that. And it is really by hand, by pulling them out. You can try watering. I know I have some in some really dry areas of my garden, and I end up having to water it like along the curb and things like that, where it's very tough to deal with and tough to get out, and certainly tough to get out with a shovel. So add some moisture there, and that make them a little bit easier to take out. So you can also, if you're worried about weeds, and if you had a lot this year, you can apply corn gluten. So people say it's often, it's a pre-emergent. So it's a natural product that's a pre-emergent, which prevents weeds from germinating. Now, if you're applying it grass seed, you can't use it because it's going to prevent your grass seed from germinating. Also prevent your grass seed from germinating in the spring. But if you're fine with grass seed and you really just want to get a handle on the weeds in your lawn, then applying some corn gluten this fall and then again in the spring, I've heard that there's much more success applying it twice in order to combat all of those nasty weeds that we don't like. But again, it is just lawn. I think we spend a lot of time and a lot of worry and a lot of money worrying about our lawns. And really, there's no beneficial, really, aside from making our homes look good and our yards look nice and green, there is nothing beneficial about a lawn. So that's something to think about. I think more and more people, and actually tomorrow I'm turning in most of a lawn and a boulevard into a garden for a client. So more and more people are getting, shrinking their lawns and making them smaller and considering how much work goes into money, time, fertilizer, energy, mowing, all of that into creating a lawn, a nice green lawn. So those are my tips for October. Again, I do want to reiterate that really there isn't that much to do. You can let everything kind of fall as fall comes and everything falls. You don't need to pick up the leaf litter. You don't have to cut anything back. That's where all the beneficial insects live. That's nobody's cleaning up the forest, right? Everything comes right back. If you have a cottage, you know that nobody's out there tidying anything up, but miraculously, all the plants are grow nicely in the following year, and so all of that material that's going to break down this winter, it's going to create little cozy spaces for beneficial insects like bees and moths and caterpillars, all of those types of things. So it's definitely worth remembering that we don't really have to do a lot out there. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, you can still grow. Even though it's October, you can still start things like spinach, radishes, another cold crop, or lettuces like mesclun, anything that likes it cool. Then you can go ahead and start it in your garden and enjoy it for the next 6 weeks or so until we get a hard frost. As usual, you know where to find me at Down the Garden Path podcast in our Facebook group, as well as all my socials. I would also love to hear any questions that you might have, any questions you have for November in the garden, which I'll be talking about obviously in a month. I would love to hear from you. So please reach out anytime with your questions. Send me a picture if you've got a design dilemma or a garden or plant dilemma. I'm happy to help. Thank you very much for listening. This episode has been brought to you by Down to Earth Landscape Design. You know it as my landscape design company here in Durham region, which is the eastern end of on the GTA in Ontario, Canada. But if you are needing help for a plan or from some garden tips now or even in the winter, you can still reach out to me and we can try to do something virtually. I'm always happy to try and help people. As I always say, great landscapes start with a plan. Thank you for listening and thank you for joining me here on Down the Garden Path.